Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to our fifth shir in the Dvar Malchus. This is the second shir in the third sicha of the Dvar Malchus from the Sichas Chelek Chav Zayin Bechukosai Aleph. Last week, when we started the sicha, we learned from Perek Yud Beis in the Rambam that the Rambam says that when the Mashiach comes, Olam kiminhagei noyeg, the world will continue in its normal order. Nothing is going to change in the world. And on this we had a question that we find in Toras Koyanim, we find in the Gemara, Masechta Ksubis, that Ilonei Serak, trees that don't give fruit, when Mashiach comes, will give fruit. This is certainly a change in the world and the nature of the world. How does the Rambam reconcile that with Olam Kiminhagei Noyeg? And then we had this question of the Ravid, who says, he brings the pasuk Vizbati Chayram in Haaretz, that when Mashiach comes, Hashem will remove or tame the wild animals. And again, it's a change in the nature of the world. So we tried answering that the differences between Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. Meaning to say that in Eretz Yisrael things will change. In Lani Srak will give fruit, but in the rest of the world nothing will change. And that's what the Rambam was referring to. And then we tried, according to the Avodas HaKodesh, that when the Rambam says Olam Kiminhagei Noyeg, he means things will go back to the way they were before Chet Eitzadas, when Hashem created the world in the beginning of Sheishes Mebereishis. That then fruit trees gave fruit, and non-fruit trees, Ilon Israk, gave fruit. Maybe that's what the Rambam means. And we refuted that that's not what the Rambam means. So we're left with the question, what does the Rambam mean when he says, Olam Kiminhagei Noyeg, while there are Mamorei Chazal and Psukim that imply that things will change? And then we had a contradiction in the Rambam himself. On the one hand, the Rambam says, Ein ben olam hazeh li'moshe Mashiach ala shibud Malchus bilvad. The only thing that changes is the fact that Yidden will not be under the rule of the other nations, but everything else seems to continue as is. But the very same Rambam says that Kol HaNaviim lo nisnabu ela li'moshe Mashiach. That all the nevuos, all the prophecies of all the wonderful, incredible things, supernatural things that are going to occur, are all with regards to Yemoshe Mashiach, the time period of the coming of Mashiach. But when you talk about Olam Haba, no one knows, no eye has beheld the what's going to happen at that time. Implying from that Rambam, from that Maimer Chazal, which is taught by Rabbi Barabba, that Yemoshe Mashiach is a time for changes. So the Rambam in one place says nothing is going to change besides for Shibud Malchus, and in another place he says that all the nevuos, all the promises and prophecies are going to happen in Yemoshe Mashiach. So the Rambam seemingly is contradicting himself. Not just we have a question from other places, the Rambam himself. And we brought up the Gemara in Shabbos, the Rambam's psak in Shabbos, that a klei zayin are considered, armor is considered, according to the Rambam, Yerchayev Chatas, for carrying it out, because it's not a tachshit, it's not considered an ornament, it's considered a kli gnai, something that is shameful. And from this we derive that the Rambam holds, like the Chachamim, that there will be no more war when Mashiach comes, and therefore it's considered therefore it's not a tachshit, it's not an ornament, it's considered something that's shameful. So how does the Rambam say that there'll be no more war when Mashiach comes, if the Rambam holds that nothing's going to change? So we're going to go back. We learned Sif Tes last week, but we're going to learn Sif Tes again, because Tes actually leads in to Sif Yud and Yud Aleph, etc. And Tes is the answer to the question, which is obviously elaborated on as we continue through the Sikha. Right now we're trying to figure out what does the Rambam hold. On the one hand he says Eilim K'menagi Noyik. On the one hand he says Ein B'Dilam Azelim Es Mashiach Chalashir Malchus Bulvat. On the other hand we have the Mamorei Chazal Badilon Israk, the trees are going to give fruit, and we have the pasuk V'Vatechai Ram and Haaretz, that the animals will be tamed or taken away, and we have the Rambam himself who says that all the nevuah, all the prophecies are going to happen in Yemais Mashiach. So we have to understand what is the Rambam Shita with regards to how will the world look when Mashiach comes. And we're going to learn Sif Tes, and Sif Tes is going to mention the fact that after Yemais Mashiach, there is also Olam Haba. Olam Haba, according to the Rambam, is Ein Bei Legufu Gvia. Olam Haba, there's no body. It's just neshamas. That's the ultimate reward, and that is a world of neshamas without gufim, without bodies. And that's going to raise a question on the Rambam. That means that Tchias HaMeisim, where there's neshamas big gufim, neshamas in gufim, happens before Olam Haba, which means in Yemais Mashiach. So now we have the biggest question: if the Rambam holds Olam Kiminhagei Noyeg, that everything continues as is, what greater change in the world can there be than Tchias HaMeisim? And the Rambam holds that Tchias HaMeisim is one of the Gimel Likrim. So how does he reconcile Olam Kiminhagei Noyeg together with Tchias HaMeisim? And that's going to lead us to the Chiddush of this Sikha, that the Rambam holds that there's two tkufas, there's two time periods within Yemais Mashiach itself. There's a time period of Olam Kiminhagei Noyeg, and there's a time period of things that go into the supernatural, into the miraculous, where Olam HaTchiyah takes place, where Tchias HaMeisim takes place, and other prophecies about the time that are outside of nature. How is it possible for the Rambam to write? Then Yemais Mashiach, there's nothing's going to change, and there will be no chidush, no innovation in the creation of the world. One of the 13 principles of the Rambam is that there'll be Tchias HaMeisim, which is clearly a change in the world order, and clearly something, an innovation, a chidush, an unusual thing in the way the world it was created until now. Now, according to certain shittas, unlike the Rambam, they hold that the ultimate world is Olam HaTchiyah, which means to say that resurrection takes place in Olam Haba, and the ultimate reward is for neshamis the way they are in the gufim. Then Tchias HaMeisim is a secondary event that takes place after Yemais Mashiach, where there are neshamis begufim, where there's Tchias HaMeisim and neshamis begufim and schar, the ultimate reward. But according to the Rambam who holds that Olam Haba, the Rambam says Ein Bei Legufu Gvia, there's no body for the neshamas, because at that point the neshamas will be without their bodies. And the world of resurrection is not the ultimate world of reward. Rather, the Rambam holds that Tchias HaMeisim takes place in the same time period of Yemais Mashiach before Olam Haba. Then, according to the Rambam, there clearly is a change in the world, in the natural order of the world. The fact that the dead will be resurrected. So how could the Rambam say that nothing's going to change from the world order, from the natural order of things, if there's Tchias HaMeisim happening? So therefore, it must seem the Rambam holds. So yes, there are two components in two separate times. Yes, there's one part which is the coming of Mashiach. There's another additional component, which will be introduced after the beginning of Yemais Mashiach, after the first time period of Yemais Mashiach, that then certain things will be added, or introduced. Things that Hashem will do in that time, including things that are a change in the world. And that's going to take place in a secondary, in a later period within Yemei Mashiach. This is a chiddush of the Rebbe in understanding the Rambam. And based on the questions, there seems to be no other way to understand the Rambam. But the Rambam must hold that within Yemei Mashiach itself, before Elam Haba, after Golus, before Elam Haba, in the Tkufa of Yemei Mashiach, there are two sub periods. One is the period of the coming of Mashiach, which is period number 1, which, as we'll see later, is a period of Elam K'minhag Noyeg. And then later on, a new time period is introduced, during which there's Tchias HaMesim and other supernatural changes in the world. In Sif Yud, he's going to explain how this fits in very well with Perek Yud Aleph. In Perek Yud Aleph, he explained, especially according to the first Sicha in Dvar Malchus, how the purpose of Perek Yud Aleph is to teach us the halachic definition of Mashiach. What is Mashiach? And what is he here to accomplish? And he is here to bring to Shleimus Kiyum HaTeirah VaMitzvahs, the ultimate fulfillment of Teirah Mitzvahs, for which he's going to have to bring peace to the Yidden so that they can keep Teirah Mitzvahs. He has to build the Beis HaMikdash so that we can keep the mitzvahs that are dependent on the Beis HaMikdash, and that's Mashiach. And specifically, he said that Mashiach is not about changing the world. And he brought a proof from Rabbi Akiva. That Rabbi Akiva believed in Ben Kuziva, that he was Mashiach, even though he didn't make any changes. And why is that? Because the Mashiach has to prove himself by doing what he's meant to do. Introducing changes into the world is not Mashiach's job. Mashiach's job is to bring Teirah Mitzvahs, bring the fulfillment of Teirah Mitzvahs. And therefore that's what Mashiach has to do. And that's how we know that he's Mashiach, as the Rambam explained so beautifully in Perek Yud Aleph. So now he's going to say that in Perek Yud Beis he doesn't bring another raya to this, because he's relying on the raya in Perek Yud Aleph, because Perek Yud Aleph and Perek Yud Beis are interconnected. And this will explain to us why the Rambam does not bring a raya, any raya at all, to his words, which he writes in the beginning of Perek Yud Beis. You shouldn't think that in the time of Mashiach something will change from the natural order of the world, as he did in the previous Perek. When he said the Mashiach does not have to make a miracle or a change in the world, and over there he did bring a raya, and this is what it says in Perek Yud Aleph. You shouldn't think that Mashiach has to make miracles or introduce something new into the world, or resurrect the dead, or other types of supernatural miracles. This is not true. Rabbi Akiva was a great chacham from the chachamim, from the sages of the Mishnah, and he would carry the kelim, or he was involved with Ben Kuziva, Hamelech, and Rabbi Akiva said on Ben Kuziva, which we also know as Bar Kochva, that he was Mashiach. And Rabbi Akiva and many of the Chachamim of his day thought that Ben Kuziva was Mashiach until he got killed. Once he was killed, they discovered that he's not Mashiach. But and Chachamim did not ask from Ben Kuziva to make any miracles. So from this we see that you don't need to make any miracles to prove that you're Mashiach. So we see that in Perek Yud Aleph he did bring a raya, and in Perek Yud Beis he doesn't bring a raya. But we understand why. Because although the two prakim in Yud Aleph and Yud Beis are actually addressing two different elements, in Perek Yud Aleph he's talking about Mashiach himself. His impact, his accomplishment, and the manner in which he will come. And the Perek Yud Beis is talking about the world. Yud Aleph is talking about Mashiach. Yud Beis is talking about the situation of the world. In the times of Mashiach, Mikol Makim, nevertheless, Harei Oise Karam Perikut Beis Al Matziv Ha'olam Ve'echshu Kasher B'Yas Mashiach. In Perikut Beis, he's talking about the world and not about Mashiach, but he's talking about the world as it is affected by the coming of Mashiach. And therefore, it is a direct connection to the Perikut Aleph, where he's talking about Mashiach. Now he talks about the world as it is impacted by Mashiach. Gam legabi hameduber beperikut beis al matzav ha'olam b'meis Mashiach shekasher b'yosei. And therefore, the power of the raya that we brought in Perikut Aleph could be used for Perikut Beis with regards to the matzah of the world. Umehem she'olam kiminhagei noeg. What is an element in the matzav, in the situation of the world when Mashiach comes, that the world will continue in this normal order? Because if the state of the world would have to be a change in the world and introduce something new into the world, it would imply that is Mashiach's accomplishment. That the coming of Mashiach brings about a change in the world. Then Mashiach would have to prove himself by what he came to do, which is by making changes in the world or performing miracles. And that would be the true test for the authenticity of Mashiach, because that is Mashiach's a novelty. And since in the Rambam proves from Rabbi Akiva that Mashiach does not have to make miracles, it's obvious that Mashiach's coming does not bring about a change in the order of the world. In other words, if Mashiach's coming would change the world, then Mashiach is defined by a world change. The Mashiach has to make miracles, change something in the world to prove that he's Mashiach. And the Rambam proves that that's not the case, because the Rambam holds that Mashiach's a definition is not changing the world, which means that the world doesn't change when Mashiach comes, because the two prakim are connected. So according to the Rambam, the way the Rebbe explained the Rambam in Siman Aleph of the Dvar Malchus, that Perikut Aleph is teaching us that Mashiach is not here to make changes. Mashiach is here to bring back the fulfillment, the ultimate fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. And therefore Mashiach, the proof of Mashiach, the test for Mashiach is he able to bring the world back to a state where Yidden can truly fulfill Torah mitzvahs in the fullest sense. So from this, we know that the world won't change. And therefore the Rambam doesn't have to bring another raya, because the same raya that Rambam used in Perikut Aleph applies to Perikut Beis. Sif Yud Aleph. Now we'll understand. Oh, I'm sorry. Now I was jumping ahead. We'll move on Lefizah. Sharichas Divrei Rambam Perikut Beis binyan matzav el Meis Mashiach. Kol zeh hu beinyan uzman shebemeis Mashiach shekashur imelech HaMashiach u'biyaseh. And therefore, since the Rambam in Perikut Beis is coming behemshich in continuation to Perikut Aleph, so when we're talking about the state of the world, we're talking about the state of the world as it changes with the coming of Mashiach. As Mashiach comes, the world changes or doesn't change or is affected by Mashiach. This is what we're talking about in Perikut Beis. In Perikut Aleph, the Rambam explains what is the concept, what is the definition of Mashiach. That Melech HaMashiach is going to restore the kingdom of the dynasty of David the Melech to its origins, to its initial rulership. He's going to build the base of Mikdash. Is going to gather the dispersed of the Yidden. And then all of the mitzvahs will be able to be restored. That Mashiach is going to bring about the completion of the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. Then he continues the Perikut Beis. The state of the world, which will be consistent with the fact that Mashiach is bringing about the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. So Yisrael, the Yidden will have the time to be involved in Torah and its wisdom. There won't be no hunger, no famine, nor war. And the involvement of the entire world will be to know Hashem. The Yidden will be great sages. The most important part, if they could learn and they could be involved in the chachma of Torah, and they're not distracted by war or famine, that the Yidden will be able to fulfill Torah mitzvahs in a world in which the natural order continues. So the Rambam, which is coming from a halachic perspective, the Rambam is telling us what's the get of Mashiach, and based on that, what's the world going to look like when Mashiach comes. And if the purpose of Mashiach is to bring about a shleimus hateirev mitzvahs, then where is the perfect place for that to happen? In a natural world. Now we can understand why there was a seeming contradiction in the Rambam, where the Rambam says, and then we found out that there's various psukim or Chazal that imply a change. Now we'll understand why. Obviously, there's a time when Mashiach comes, when the world stays as it is. Then there's a later time when all of the other psukim or Chazal will be able to be fulfilled. Based on this, we can understand the shita of the Rambam and understanding the various psukim and Memorei Chazal. The laws with regards to the promises about the coming of Mashiach. Those promises and those prophecies that are connected to Mashiach himself. The actions of Mashiach. And that which will happen in the world as an outcome of his coming. The Rambam explains that there cannot be a change in the nature of the world. Therefore, when it comes to V'gar Zeivim Keves, which even though it's really V'gar Zeivim Keves is really talking about the world, things that are going on in the world, but in the case of that pasuk, it's coming in direct in the continuation to the Yatsa Chayter Megeza Yishai. A plant will come out from the stem of Yishai, which is a nevuah about Mashiach himself, and therefore V'gar Zeivim Keves, which comes right after that, has to be talking not as a mashal v'chida, not metaphorical, but it has to be literal. And he explains what is the metaphor. That Yidden will be able to sit safely together with the Rishoyim of the nations, which is a part of being able to fulfill Torah mitzvahs, because that's what Mashiach is coming to accomplish. And even though the Rambam continues that all of these things are actually metaphors, but doesn't explain the nimshal. He says, and on the contrary, he actually says that when Mashiach comes, then we will discover what each of the metaphors were referring to. So the reason why he doesn't explain it all is because the most important thing in this discussion is to say that the pasukim or the pasuk that is part of a Yatsa Chayte Megeza Yishai, which is talking about the inyan of Mashiach. The Yidden will not have any distractions from the nations. That the Rambam's main point is to say that the Yidden will be able to learn Torah. Therefore, he doesn't go into all the other details of the metaphors, because that's not Negeah here. Here in the Rambam is Negeah to know that Yidden will be able to learn Torah. That the Goyim are not going to distract them from learning Torah, or disturb them. And therefore, that's the only one that Rambam explains, because that's Negeah to the state of the world as it is relevant to the coming of Mashiach and the impact of Mashiach, which is to be able to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. But when you talk about the psukim that are not in direct connection to Mashiach and his coming, rather they're talking about various prophecies and promises that will take place in the future, including the pasuk mentioned earlier from the David, I will remove the wild animals from the world. And the Maimed Azal mentioned earlier that the trees that didn't give fruit are now going to give fruit. The Rambam also says that it's not a metaphor; it's to be understood literally. However, these things will take place in a later time period within Yemei Mashiach itself. Because when Mashiach comes, his inyan is to keep the world going as is and bring the Yidden back to Kiymat Mitzvahs. But later on, there's going to be a more miraculous world, including some of these psukim and Marei Chazal that speak about supernatural things or unnatural things that have to be understood, even by the Rambam, in the literal sense. Umiyato yuvan gam achilek ben hamaymer. And we could also use the same explanation to explain the differences between the Teras Kerim and the Gemara in Ksubis. If you remember, the Gemara in Ksubis said, they will carry fruit, not they will produce fruit, like the Teras Kerim, which doesn't say Eretz Yisrael, and it says Oisim Peres. So now I can say like this: that all the fruit tree, the trees that didn't give fruit in Eretz Yisrael are going to carry fruit, which sounds unnatural. It's not like they're going to produce fruit, but they're going to carry fruit. It seems like it's something special, and it's going to be in Eretz Yisrael. Is talking about the first tkufa, which in the rest of the world is the world continues in its natural order. But according to this man Amar and Ksubis, in Eretz Yisrael there will be some change even in the first tkufa. In the Teras Kerim, it doesn't say Yitanu, and it doesn't say Eretz Yisrael. It says Stam. All the trees that didn't give fruit are going to give fruit. And the fact that it's used the word Oisim Peres, it sounds like it's doing it naturally. So that naturally, all of a sudden, it's giving fruits, which is clearly a change in the nature. They're talking about the second period of Yemei Mashiach, which then there will be a change in creation, and therefore even the trees that don't give fruit, their nature will change and they'll give fruit. So earlier on, we had brought these differences between Gemara Ksubis and Teras Kerim. We could use those differences to based on these two tkufas. Tkufa number one, and only in Eretz Yisrael there'll be a special nace, special miracle, that the trees will carry fruit, although it's not going to be part of their nature. But when will the trees change their nature and actually give fruit and not limited to Eretz Yisrael? That's in the second tkufa, and that's what the Teras Kerim is talking about. And we could use the same idea of the two tkufas to explain the stira, the contradiction in the Rambam. When in one place he says, there's no difference between this world, the Yemei Mashiach, besides for the fact that we won't be under the rulership of the nations. And the other place in the Rambam where he says that all the nevuos are applying to Yemei Mashiach, which implies that there will be changes, because he's talking about two different tkufas. So now we understand that the two rulings of the Rambam are not contradicting to each other. When the Rambam says that the two things, that nothing's going to change, besides for Shibud Malchus, this is talking about the first tkufa, the first period. And that which Rambam says that all the prophecies are going to happen in Yemei Mashiach, some of which are miraculous or supernatural. This is talking about the later tkufa, the later period of Yemei Mashiach, which, as we said earlier, is going to be a time when things do change in the natural order of the world, and there will be nisim, and there will be a change in minhagei shaleilam. V'yosi shapir gam hashakasav shayitz b'klizayim b'shabbos chayiv chatos. And now we understand why the Rambam says that chayiv chatos, even if someone goes out with weapons, he is chayiv chatos, even though that would mean that he holds that there's going to be, that war will be abolished when Mashiach comes. Like we said earlier, that according to the Chachamim, which hold that you're chayiv chatos for carrying out a weaponry in B'Shoigig, is because they hold that there will be no more war when Mashiach comes, and therefore now when we do have weapons, they're only a gnai, they're only something shameful, and they're not a tachshit, they're not an ornament which you would be allowed to carry. So we ask the question, how could the Rambam say that you're chayiv chatos based on the shit of the Chachamim? That there'll be no more war. If no more war is a change in the world order, and we said that Rambam holds Olik Menagei Noyek. But now we understand that we're talking about two different tkufas. The pasuk where it says that they'll beat their swords into plowshares, meaning to say there'll be no more war. The Rambam understands it literally, not as a metaphor. Which is going to happen in the second tkufa, in the later period of Yemei Mashiach. And since in the second tkufa, at least, weaponry will cease to be necessary because war won't be necessary. This is a proof that weaponry is not an ornament but a shameful tool, and therefore you can't wear it. You can't wear it in the Shus Rabbim, and you're chayiv chatas. But it's not a steer to the fact that the Rambam holds Olik Menagei Noyek, because that's in the first tkufa, and in the first tkufa there will be war, or there'll at least be the possibility of war. But the fact that war will not be possible, that happens in the second tkufa. And that's what the Rambam holds, Yechayiv Achatos. Before we continue with the next part of the discussion, which is, how does the second tkufa, how and when does the second tkufa come about, which will start in Sif Tezayin. In Sif Tezvav, he introduces one more nekuda that could be answered, that could be reconciled, based on the fact that we understand now that according to the Rambam, there are two tkufas in the Yemei Mashiach. In Gemara in Brachas, where it brings this machloikis, that Rabbi Rabbi holds that all the Nevi'im prophesize with regards to the Yemei Mashiach, but in Olam Haba, no eye has beheld what will happen at that time, and Shmuel, who argues with Rav Chiya bar Abba and says that there's no difference between this world and Yemei Mashiach other than Shibud Malchus. So this is a Gemara that's brought in Brachas, among other places, but it's brought in Brachas. In that Gemara in Brachas, it says all the promises of the good that's coming, the Eibush is talking to Bali Tshuva. But tzaddikim gemurim, no eye has beheld the godliness that awaits them. And this would be in disagreement with Rabbi, because this passage, this Rabbi Chiya bar Abba implies that tzaddikim are on a higher level than Bali Tshuva. The Balei Tshuva are getting all the promises of the Nevi'im, but the promises that are await the tzaddikim are much greater. Nobody knows what they are. This is in disagreement with Rebavo. The Amar Rebavo, Malchus Balei Tshuva Emdim, tzaddikim gemurim and emdim, that the place where Balei Tshuva stand, tzaddikim gemurim can't stand there, or don't stand there, or are not able to stand there, depending on the various nuschais. But clearly, according to Rebavo, Balei Tshuva are on a higher level than tzaddikim. So according to Rabbi Rabbi, the tzaddikim are higher, and their schar is beyond what the Nevi'im have promised. And according to the Bavo, tzaddikim gemurim Balei Tshuva are on a higher level. And since these two teachings of Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan, one that all the Nevi'im leinis nabba the Mesa Mashiach, and call the Nevi'im leinis nabba the Bali Tshuva, since these two follow one right after the other, it seems that they're connected to each other. Which would imply that according to the Shita of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, that all the Nevi'im only said Nevuah li'yamaisa Mashiach. Tzarech leimar gam shekol haNevi'im kulan lenisnaba lebali tshuva. You would have to also say that all the tzaddikim, that all the Nevi'im are talking to Bali Tshuva, not the tzaddikim, like Rabbi Chia bar Abba, like Rabbi Avo, like Shmuel, which would argue with Rabbi Avo, who holds that Bali Tshuva are greater than tzaddikim, and would argue with Shmuel, who holds that Yemaisa Mashiach nothing changes besides Reshivit Malchus. Ulam Rambam, however, the Rambam, even though with regards to Yemaisa Mashiach, he does bring the psak of Rabbi Chia bar Abba that all the Nevi'im are only speaking about Yemaisa Mashiach, but Elam Abba, Ayin Leira Solakim Zulasecha. Nevertheless, with regards to the tzaddikim and Bali Tshuva argument, he passes like Rabbi Avo and not like Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So the question is, if we understand that Rabbi Chia bar Abba, his two statements are connected, and if you hold Kol Nevi'im L'Nisnaba L'Mesa Mashiach, then you have to also say Kol Nevi'im L'Nisnaba L'Bali Tshuva, and that Bali Tshuva are greater than tzaddikim are greater than Bali Tshuva. So how does the Rambam, when it comes to Mashiach, paskin to the Mashiach versus Elam Haba, paskin like Rabbi Chia bar Abba, and then when it comes to tzaddikim versus Bali Tshuva, he paskins not like Rabbi Chia bar Abba, but like Rabbi Avo. Ula, now move on, however, says the Rebbe, according to this explanation that there's two tkufis when Mashiach comes, it's understood. Rabbi Chia bar Abba who says that tzaddikim are greater is only following his shita that even at the beginning of Yemaisa Mashiach there'll be bittul menagah shaleilam. This one the Nevi'im are talking about. But according to the Rambam who disagrees with Rabbi Chia bar Abba, in other words, even though the Rambam who quotes Rabbi Chia bar Abba, which Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Kol Nevi'im L'Nisnaba L'Mesa Mashiach, the Rabbi Chia bar Abba holds that it applies to the right away. The Rambam doesn't. He quotes Rabbi Chia bar Abba, but he doesn't agree with Rabbi Chia bar Abba with regards to the fact that it starts right away. He holds that Rabbi Chia bar Abba is talking about starts at a secondary, at a later time period. And in the beginning of Yemaisa Mashiach, now we have no proof that tzaddikim are greater. According to Rabbi Chia bar Abba, because he holds that Yemaisa Mashiach starts right away with Shini Menagah Shaleilam, therefore he holds tzaddikim are greater. But according to the Rambam, who doesn't, even though he quotes Rabbi Chia bar Abba, but does not agree with Rabbi Chia bar Abba that Bitul Menagah Shaleilam begins right away, he holds that in the beginning it's Eilam K'Menagah Noyeg. Therefore, he doesn't have to follow the shita of Rabbi Chia bar Abba that tzaddikim are greater than Bali Tshuva, and he could paskin like Rab Avo that tzaddikim, that Bali Tshuva are greater. I do have to say that I personally am lacking a understanding in the connection between that according to the Rabbi Chia bar Abba, the fact that he holds tzaddikim are greater than Bali Tshuva only works according to his shita that even in the beginning of Yemaisa Mashiach, to the Rebbe, it seems obvious that Rabbi Chia bar Abba holds tzaddikim Yom Bali Tshuva is only according to his shita that because in the beginning of Yemaisa Mashiach is Bitul Menagah Shaleilam, and I'm not sure I understand why. So I understand the reconciliation that the Rambam could say both psukim, because even though he says he doesn't understand it the way Rabbi Chia bar Abba means it, and therefore he could still say that Bali Tshuva are greater than tzaddikim. But the premise that tzaddikim are greater than Bali Tshuva is dependent on the shita of Bitul Menagah Shaleilam. I didn't quite catch the connection, and hopefully, so those of you who are listening to the shir will be able to discuss it, talk about it, and if you do know, share it either to me or to whomever in the forum, in the ha'aris, so that we can gain some clarity in what is the deeper understanding of this keta. Okay, so Ad Kan, we've established that according to the Rambam, there are two tkufas in Yemei Mashiach. The first tkufa is with the coming of Mashiach, which is where the world continues in its normal order, in its natural order. And the purpose of this time is Shleimus Kiyum HaTorah VaMitzvos, the ultimate fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, which Mashiach is going to bring about. Then there's a later tkufa, during which there's Tchias HaMesim and other supernatural, miraculous events. And with this we reconcile that whenever the Rambam seems to imply lean to the more natural order of things, he's referring about an earlier tkufa. Whenever the Rambam, or for that matter, other nevuas, other prophecies, and other Mamari Chazal and Psukim that imply to a supernatural order of the world, this is referring to a second tkufa, a later tkufa, later period in the era of Yemei Mashiach, during which miraculous things will take place, including Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. Now we have a question. When and how does this second tkufa come about? That's what we're going to address in Siftei Zayin and beyond. After all this, we still have to explain. Since the definition of Yemei Mashiach, as they are connected to the coming of Mashiach, as we explained at length, according to the Rambam, is connected with Eilam K'Menagin Noyeg. What is the compelling proof that there'll be a second tkufa? That there'll be another tkufa, another period during which things will change. More importantly, Mahi Oisa Siba Nifla Shetavi V'Tigraim L'Chidish Nifla. What is this incredible innovation that is going to bring about this wonderful, I guess let's rephrase the question. What is this incredible reason that will bring about this incredible innovation of this order of the second period? Which is a very simple question. When does it happen? How does it happen? In other words, the fact that Mashiach comes and he brings about Shleimus Akim HaTorah makes sense. Build a Beis Hamikdash, we can bring Karbanos. He's gonna win the wars, so there'll be no distraction. So we can sit and learn Torah, do mitzvahs, 613 mitzvahs. We don't have to miss any of them. Then what happens? At what point is there? Who says it has to happen? What's going to bring it about? When does it happen? Now the Rebbe is going to introduce a passage from Igeres Tchias HaMesim, a letter written by the Rambam, that sort of changes our whole approach. Because till now we were looking at it from Perek Yud Aleph Yud Beis in the Rambam, which is halacha, and then the Rambam says it in a halachic way, which is clear and defined. Now there's Igeres Tchias HaMesim, which is not halacha necessarily, and therefore it's written in a different way. And the Rambam says, he says the fact that he explained the promises of, for example, the gar zeivim keves, that the wolf will live with a lamb, that they are a metaphor and not to be taken literal. This is not absolute. It's not definitive. That's a metaphor. The and it's possible that it's going to happen in literally. So according to what we explained previously in this Sikha, we explained in Yud and Yud Beis that the whole definition of Mashiach is to keep the world in the proper order, so that way we could keep the Torah mitzvahs properly. So in other words, we have to explain the promises in a way that they're not a change in the natural order of the world. Because the whole definition of Mashiach is that he should impact the world the way it is in its natural order. Okay, now as we explained at length. And that's why Mashiach does not have to make a chiddush in the world. And that's why Ben Kuziva did not have to make a chiddush in the world in order for Rabbi Akiva to believe that he was Mashiach, because the whole gedet of Mashiach is to work within the framework of this world, to bring about Shleimus Akiyim Ateirev HaMitzvah. So how could the Rambam now say that it's possible that it'll be Kipshutai and that the world will be different? So now we're going to explain. We now have a contradiction between the Rambam and Halacha. The Rambam in Geras Tchias HaMeisim, which the Rambam in Halacha says that the world will not change, at least in the first kufa. And in the Geras Tchias HaMeisim, he says that the world may change. So he says like this. And Sif Yud Zayin is going to explain how this is possible. We know that the Gemara asks the Gabi Stiras Apsukim with regards to the Stira contradiction in the following Psukim. In Daniel it says that behold, the man is coming in the clouds of the heaven. The Mashiach is going to come down from Shemayim. There's another pasuk that says a pauper riding on a donkey. So the question is he coming down on the clouds of Shemayim, or is he coming riding on a donkey like a poor person? So the Gemara answers, Zachu even on Ishmaya. If the Yidden are meritorious, if they are deserving, then the Mashiach is going to come on the clouds. Leizachu, if they are not meritorious, if they are not deserving, then he's going to come on a donkey. And similarly, the Gemara uses this idea to reconcile other contradictions in the psukim, that there's a difference of zachu and leizachu. That the way Mashiach's coming occurs will depend on whether the Yidden are meritorious or if they're not meritorious, if they are more deserving or less deserving. So from this we can derive with regards to other ideas that are relevant to the coming of Mashiach, that if the Yidden are in a meritorious situation, that everything that's going to happen is going to be on an entirely different level. It'll be on a miraculous level. This is one of the ways to reconcile the machlekes with regards to the Beis Hamikdash, the building of the Beis Hamikdash. In certain places it says that the Beis Hamikdash is already built and is already in a state of perfection, and it's going to be revealed and come down from a Shemayim, from heaven. Other places it says, and this is what the Rambam paskins, the Mashiach is going to have to build the Beis Hamikdash. So which one is it? Is the Beis Hamikdash coming down from Shemayim, or is Mashiach going to have to build it? These two can be resolved with two different manners of Geula, of Zachu and Leizachu. Zachu, if they are meritorious, then it will be revealed and come down from heaven. However, if they are not meritorious, then it won't come from Shemayim. It'll have to be built by a human being down below, through Mashiach. So now we understand that it's not just whether Mashiach is coming in Anishmaya or is Anivarechem Alachamer, or if the Beis Hamikdash is Yigalav Yamin Hashemayim or Mashiach Ben Hamikdash. But there's many different elements in the coming of Mashiach that are dependent on Zachu or Leizachu. That which in the Sefer Hayad and Rambam, which is a Sefer HaHalacha, the Rambam paskins that there will not be a change in the world order. Since the general idea of Mashiach is a component of halacha, which halacha has to be clear and defined. And this oifen, the oifen of oilim kiminagi noyig, that it's not dependent on the actions of the people. Unlike the Geula in a way of Mashiach coming from the clouds, that is dependent on the Yidden being in a meritorious state. It's not clear. It's not definite. Because everything comes from Shemayim, besides for Yiddish Shemayim, which is dependent on the person. Excuse me. As Chachamim tell us that a person has the reshus, person has free choice given to a person which way he wants to go. So the zachu is not something that Rambam can count on. It's not definite. And halacha has to be definite. So the Rambam, when he speaks about it as a halacha. He says how it has to be without depending it on the state of the Yidden at the time. So, the explanation of the Rambam, why the Rambam speaks about Mashiach in a Olam Kiminhagin Noyeg way, is because the Rambam is coming from the perspective of halacha, which halacha has to be clear and defined, and he can't promise you the Aruim and Anishmaya, and therefore the Rambam says, Al Pi halacha, the clearest, most definite form of Mashiach coming is Olam Kiminhagin Noyeg, which would be even in a case of Lei Zachor Chas V'Shalom. Let's go a step deeper. Not only are we saying that Al Pi Halacha, Mashiach, Al Pi Halacha, the Bias HaMashiach is Olam Kiminhagin Noyeg, because that's Barer Muchlet. Let's go a little bit deeper than that. The fact that the Rambam describes the Geula not as a change in the world, it's not because in Sif Yud Zayin he said that the Rambam is talking about Lei Zachu, because Lei Zachu is the bottom, is what's for sure going to happen. In other words, if Lei Zachu, at least this is going to happen. This is the rock bottom, the foundation. So therefore, the Rambam talks about that because he knows that could happen. Sif Yud Ches, he says no. He says it doesn't mean that Rambam is trying to tell you that we're talking about a matzav of Lei Zachu and therefore Olam Kiminhagin Noyeg. Ela mishum shehu mefarish ma she'amru Chazal shehu matzav shel Zachu yiyu kama v'kama Elohim and Aganisis. The fact that Chazal tell us that when the Yidden are in a meritorious state, there will be certain advantages and certain miracles. Harizel inyan noisav latim kedush Mashiach. It's not only to tell you that if there's Zachu, then they get this. If there's Lei Zachu, they get this. But if there's Zachu, then they're going to get something else. Say no. You have the Etzem Gedet of Mashiach, which is Olam Kiminhagin Noyeg, and then you have an extra. You have other additional things that Hashem will give us. From the perspective of the definition of Mashiach and the coming of Mashiach, the order, regardless of Zachu or Lei Zachu, the order is Olam Kiminhagin Noyeg. Ki ka'amur chidush shel biyas HaMashiach b'halacha hu shal yadei tavei shleimus kiyum atera v'halacha kiyum mitzvahs v'halacha shel teira shekasher Olam Kiminhagin Noyeg. The halachic definition of Mashiach is to bring about the fulfillment of Teira mitzvahs, which is dependent on Olam Kiminhagin Noyeg, on a natural world. Ella shebishah sheyisrael imatzav na'ala shel zachu. But if the Yidden are in a higher level, they elevated themselves to a meritorious level, there'll be an additional thing. That Hashem will show extra nisim to show an extra preciousness and an extra love to the Yidden. So in Sif Yud Zayin he said that Zachu is Olam Kiminhagin Noyeg, Lei Zachu is Hanagin Nisis, miraculous, and the Rambam says Zachu. The Rambam says Olam Kiminhagin Noyeg because that's what he can count on, without depending on the Yidden. Sif Yud Ches says that Al Pi Halacha it doesn't depend on Zachu or Lei Zachu. the geder ha'hilchasi, the halachic definition of Mashiach is enok v'nageneik. But then there are certain presents, certain gifts that Hashem will give the Yidden if they're zachu. And you could apply this to the what we said before, to resolve the different mamari chazal, or different psukim rather, with regards to the Beis Hamikdash. If you're looking from the perspective of Sif Yud Zayin, then it's the two are a stira. Mashiach Bein Hamikdash is a stira to Yigalav Yavim Shemayim, and if you say this is Zach or this is Leizach, he says no, they're not a stira, they can both happen. So mitzad gader halacha in Beis Hamikdash uchiv mitzal kol Yisrael. From the halachic perspective, the building the Beis Hamikdash is a chiyuv and a yid. Ukpeisha namar basal Hamikdash, as it says basal Hamikdash. Lachem pesach gadam shechav shiach shayad echid zekom spatim yom k'shoyim mekedem umein in melech v'achach beinas Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, the Rambam says that the Rambam who holds that through Mashiach there's going to be to bring back all of the mitzvahs as they were in the past. So therefore, they're going to appoint a king, and therefore Mashiach is going to build the Beis Hamikdash. Melech HaMashiach yivatzeyas mitzvahs b'nei Beis Hamikdash. Melech HaMashiach will implement the building of the Beis Hamikdash, because al pi halacha, the Mashiach, the Beis Hamikdash has to be built by a person. V'hamatzav shel zachu pe'elei safa shebeteich hamikdash dilemata yovei v'yislabesh hamikdash dilemayla sheyovei v'yigol ben hashemayim. And then, but if the Yidden reach a zachu, then within the mikdash dilemata that's being built by Mashiach, because al pi halacha the Beis Hamikdash has to be built by a human being, there'll be a ness. There'll be a miraculous mikdash dilemayla within the mikdash dilemata. They could both happen simultaneously. Since if you're Zion, we saw them as a stira, and therefore they had to be resolved. This is zachu, this is leizach. In Sif Yud Ches, they're not a stira. They're one on top of the other. There's the basic way it has to happen, because al pi halacha, that's how it works. That Mashiach is bring shleimus ateitiv mitzvahs, and Mashiach builds a Beis Hamikdash. And then, if there's a matzav of zachu within the avodah of the Yidden, there will be an haganisis, and within the Beis Hamikdash dilemata, there'll be a Beis Hamikdash dilemayla. Al pisa move on. So according to this, we can now understand. So remember, our initial question was, what brings about the second tkufa? What changes and brings about an haganisis, a tchias hamesim, a shinui min hagish shel. But now we can understand. Now that we understand that there's a zachu and a leizachu, and that a zachu, when the Yidden reach a meritorious state, it brings about a miraculous, supernatural order of the world, where Hashem shows an extra love to the Yidden. Now we understand why it is so necessary that there's going to be a second tkufa. After Mashiach comes, in whatever manner, whether it's zachu or leizachu, however he comes, since there'll be no distraction, there is nobody to disturb them from learning Torah, which there's nobody who's not going to allow them to learn Torah and do mitzvahs properly. On the contrary, they're going to be available to learn Torah and be involved in the wisdom of Torah. So much so that even the rest of the world is going to be engaged and involved in Ladas as Hashem Bilvad, knowing Hashem, or the Fichach Yisyu. Therefore, the Yidden are going to be great sages. So much so that they're going to be filled with the knowledge of Hashem. Kamayim liyom mechasim, like the water fills the ocean. How does a yavi b'ech? Sorry, so since the Yidden are going to be learning Torah, and there'll be no distraction, and they're going to be so engaged and involved and immersed in the knowledge of Hashem, that is zachu. That is a meritorious state. So this will bring about automatically the second tkufa, which is a tkufa in which things change in the world. It's going to bring about the miraculous order, including that which the Rambam calls the fundamental idea of Tchiyas HaMesim. So therefore, there has to be a change. Because even if Mashiach came, and Mashiach had to bring Yidden to Shleimus HaTorah v'Mitzvahs and bring it and build the Beis Hamikdash and everything like that. But at a certain point, as the Rambam himself says, that Mashiach is going to remove the disturbances and distractions, and Yidden are going to sit and learn Torah and do mitzvahs. Automatically, they're going to reach Zachu. And if they reach Zachu, Zachu brings about an Haganisis. So the Zachu that is automatically going to come about because of the fact that of a Mashiach is going to bring the Yidden to Shleimus Kiyum HaTorah v'Mitzvahs is automatically going to trigger a second Tkufa. A Tkufa of an Haganisis. A Tkufa of miraculous times. Including Tchias HaMesim. V'lachein. In the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, Sefer Hayad, where he's speaking about the definition of Mashiach according to Halacha, he explains the world in a state of the natural order of the world, which is consistent with the idea and the definition of Mashiach, which is that it'll bring about the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs in a natural world. In Igeres Tchias HaMesim, in the Rambam's letter about Tchias HaMesim, where he is not limited to the halacha, who Moisef Bir b'Sefer Hayad, he adds more understanding into what he says in Sefer Hayad. Shein Dvareinu Zachleti, that this idea of Eilim K'Minag the world will stay in their natural order, is not definite. Because if the Yidden are in a state of Zachu, of merit, then even while the Yidden are in Galus, meaning right from the beginning of the Geula, there's going to be a special treatment that where the world, or natural order of the world will change. In other words, just like we're saying here, that within Yemoisa Mashiach, when the Yidden reach Zachu, they're going to reach a second Tkufa. This means that if the Yidden reach Zachu in Galus, at the very, very big end of Galus, at the very beginning of Yemoisa Mashiach, then the Hanag Nisis begins right away. And therefore, in Geres Tchias HaMesim, he says that Taka Emes, the Geder HaHilchasi, the halachic definition of Mashiach is Eilim K'Minag Noig. But if the Yidden reach Zachu, then mitzad the chavivus, the love of Hashem, then right from the get-go of Yemoisa Mashiach, there's going to be a Hanhaga Nisis, a special Hanhaga from the Eibishter which changes the world order. Like the Rambam says, that there'll be niflois, there'll be wondrous things, which refers to something that's even greater than Nisim. And therefore, he says, it's not for sure that it's going to be literal, because there is a possibility that it's going to be that Eilim K'Nagin Noig is not going to be, and the psukim will be understood literally, because there'll be an Agonissus from the very beginning. So that answers our second the second part of the Sikha, or the third part of the Sikha, if you will. What brings about the second Kufa? What brings about the second Kufa is Zachu. And therefore, it comes out a very, very powerful message to us. And that is that what the world will look like when Mashiach comes depends on us. In other words, if we're looking for Hanag Nisis, if we want to see a Bittul Menagi Shalelam, and the miraculous supernatural world, it depends on Zachu. So if we wait until Zachu, till deep into Yemoisa Mashiach, Chas v'Shalom, then it starts out Eilim K'Minagi Noig, and then it changes. But we have the power to be Zachu. And if we can reach Zachu, then from the very first moment of Bias HaMashiach, it'll go straight to the Hanag Nisis. So how will the world look when Mashiach comes? That depends on us.